Let me bring in Ajuri. He's got a question for you. Ajuri, go ahead.
Yes, Your Excellency, I just want to ask you some questions about some of your submissions. When you talk about children that have been out of school, we know that the official figure has been 10.5 million for some time now. We also know that that was well before the school feeding program brought several million children back into school. Approximately 8.2 million children are benefiting from that program. I want to know how you arrived at your statistic of 12%, where that came from.
Well, my figures, I said, go and read the comments that was made recently and look at the figures very well. The school feeding program, I don't want to make a comment on. It was just a case of where, I can even tell you that in some schools, once they stop feeding, the people stop coming to school. They're just coming to school to eat. But then, it's something that if you want the submission, I can give you the data that are well publicized and everything. We can't continue to bandit figures where you just arbitrarily reduce figures. Where are the figures reducing? Let us look at the, are there increase in school enrollment? Are there increase in those sitting for, say, WAEC and this, in areas where it's more prevalent in the north? Let's have the data, let's have the statistics.
Obi, I didn't hear an answer to the question I asked, which was particularly about how you arrived at the figure of the movement from 10.5 million children out of school to 12. You've said that you
actually read it recently. Recently, by the submission by the UBEC, that is about 13-point-something million. And I have the figures. I have it in one of the Vanguard publications, and it was one of the leaders in the education sector. But I can tell you that if you look at the population increase and everything, and the enrollment, you cannot match it, it can only be increasing. It's like what they said before, that the poverty is coming down.
Let's look at what you had to say about the debt. I know last year you made comments early last year that in your view the economic fundamentals of the country were not correct, and that essentially we did not have the knowledge base within the spheres of power to get the nation out of recession. You predicted that in 2017 Nigeria would not exit recession. We now know, of course, that within the second quarter of last year, Nigeria did
predict we won't come out of recession.
What are your thoughts about that?
I didn't predict we will not come out of recession. Go and check on my words. I never predicted that. What I said is that spending your way out of recession by borrowing heavily might not be sustainable, especially when you're borrowing and investing in consumption. When they said we're going to spend your way out of recession, I said no. You can't do that in an underdeveloped economy. You're borrowing for consumption. Eventually, it will catch up. Yes, we are today.
Very quickly, when we look at, let's look at the GDP numbers very quickly. In 2017, the total value of goods produced and services provided, the total GDP for 2017 for Nigeria was $375 billion. That equates, of course, to about 135 trillion. When you look at the fact that the total national debt is about 22.7 trillion, you're looking at about 21% of GDP debt ratio. That's top 20 in the world in terms of lowest debt to GDP ratio. Now, you've said the issue is not debt to GDP, but rather debt to revenue. And what I want to ask you is, when you look at the 2018 budget, and you know that it's a 9.1 trillion naira budget, and the debt servicing took up about 2.01%, 2.01 trillion, then you know that even the amount that we had budgeted within the 2018 budget for debt servicing was only 21% of the budget. We know around the world people are looking at 40 and 50% of their budget being spent on debt servicing. We're still very low. So when you say that there's an issue with debt to revenue, that comes into question. What do you have to say about that?
I don't know where you got your figures, but let me tell you. One is that the budget is low. Your budget is 9.something trillion, which is just barely about $30 billion. $30 billion. When South Africa is budgeting $21 billion for education alone, when countries like Thailand is budgeting $18 billion for education alone, and I can go on and on. These are smaller countries. So your budget is low. So you're talking about debt servicing. Go and read the debt servicing of Thailand, South Africa. They are far below the figures you're talking now. We cannot continue. What I'm saying, our debt to GDP is low. Yes, but it is debt to revenue. If you own a house worth 100 million naira and your revenue is 15 million, you don't go and talk about your debt to your value. You talk about the value of the house. Talk about the revenue that will service the debt. I said, at debt servicing, one bank, IMF, cannot be warning us if they think the debt doesn't have a problem.
But how come they are approving debt for borrowing for states as well? Because some of those states, they say they met their indices.
It's not a question of meeting their indices. I'm saying you're pushing them to a place where it's not manageable. You have states who are owing today salaries, pension, contractors in billions. And you are approving debts to them, which they're only using for the current expenditure. You are escalating it. And it's worrisome. We need to apply the brakes down.
So for you, it's the borrowing for consumption that's a problem. But if we borrow to build infrastructure?
Why not? If you're investing, if you're borrowing for production, that means somewhere along the line, it will either help to grow the economy or it's realizable. It's like somebody investing in a business. You can borrow to invest in a business. But when you're borrowing for consumption, there's no way of getting the money back. And that is what we're suffering today. If we look at what we've said about our issue of our poverty numbers, go and check from 1980 when it started. It was just 4 million. Today is 87 million. Look at the growth. And if you look at the highest growth came within the past 18 years. And that was the 18 years of period where abandoned governance, if I may say, and concentrating more on politics. Because if you get your politics wrong, everything is wrong. So you're pushing more and more people into poverty because of your borrowing and investing wrongly.